So it's so interesting at this conference, all the different specialties and approaches to how we're using the new controllers that are kind of coming online in the 21st century. And my approach is a little bit different because I'm really coming as an instrumentalist. I started with the organ, but in high school I started playing woodwinds and just loved the idea of learning new instruments. And so as these new instruments started becoming available, first with the microzone in the late 90s, it was just an intriguing challenge to try to figure out how to play it and develop some technical fluency. And this kind of led to the idea of polychromatic music, where you're trying to make it as simple as possible to switch between different temperaments, 55 notes, 24 notes. I don't know if you're aware of the world of microtonal music, but it's an assembly of a lot of different methods, each with their own symbol sets, maybe fractions, and it's so confusing to switch from one to the other. And as a musician, I'm like, it just needs to be easy and intuitive. So that's kind of how this process developed. And in that process, my undergraduate training was in music, and then grad school was medicine. So I was very interested in biology and perception and how far can we push the limits. And so I'll be talking about that today. Let's see here. We'll be talking about perceptual acuity. Acuity is just developing a greater level of pitch discrimination. And when we look at the world around us, we can certainly see that in the visual realm, it keeps going higher and higher and higher. And I can remember when they came out with 4K, and it's like, can anybody really see the difference? And sure enough, if you get used to watching 4K and you go back to 1080p, you're like, yes, of course, you can see the difference. So I'm thinking about that in terms of pitch. We've been limited by mechanical designs of instruments. You could only have so much string tension, and you could only fit so many keys on an instrument. And now with electronic key switches, that limitation has totally disappeared. So the way that I think of the chromatic system right now is we have this general sense of what's in between a semitone. And depending on the key, we would call it flat or sharp. But it's really an immense pitch space. We just haven't learned to discriminate the pitches in between it. And so that's why I've kind of tried to come up with a system that makes it easier to start to learn the different pitches that are in that gray zone. And so the polychromatic system is kind of just an intuitive system that is based on a color series that we already know. Because when you think about gradations in perception, we already have a language in the color language. And as you see, it's, let's see here. Oh, wait a minute. I'm getting ahead of myself. We have a series in the color language that we can use to apply to flatness up to sharpness. So if you have 5 shades of A, or you have 7 shades of A, you can still use that pitch spectrum, the series of pitch colors. So Leopold asked me to talk about synesthesia, and I've never really thought about it that way, but as instrumentalists, synesthesia is an integration of different senses. And when we're instrumentalists, that is the key to mastery of an instrument. You're starting to feel proprioception is kind of your sense of your body in space. So you're thinking about ergonomics. And then you're using your eyes, whether you're reading a score, you're looking at the fretboard, the keyboard. All of this is coming together with your ears, intonation if you don't have a fixed pitch instrument. And so I thought, well, it's never really been thought of in the world of music, so let's just think about it. So we have different kinds of associations of perceptions. Pitch number, pitch haptic. Haptic means a tactile sense or vibration. Also in music, we kind of incorporate proprioception, which is more gross body movement. And then pitch color, which we'll get to. So I was thinking, okay, pitch number. Now, you've heard about people memorizing pi out to however many digits, and I thought, well, if somebody's memorized a concerto and they convert that to intervals, they could memorize numbers in long, long, long sequences, and you come back to the same question, well, what does that mean? What is the implication of developing your memory that way? So here's an example of pi to 19 digits. Not very difficult of a melody to memorize. And the key to this was when I started playing the saxophone, I grew up using Jerry Coker's Patterns for Jazz. And so right away there was the conversion of pitch to number, because it's all based on intervals, and what this gives you is a chromatic fluency. It was so frustrating at the beginning because he didn't write out all the patterns in every key. You couldn't use notation to play it. So you had to use your ear, you had to memorize the interval patterns and then play them in every key. Now, when we talk about haptic sensation, again, mostly people talk about it with touch and vibration when you're creating new technology. But in music, we also kind of combine the body position, and we call it motor memory. And so here's a wonderful example of the extent that you can develop motor memory. Because I suppose it's like anything else that you learn. You learn it, first you're learning the notes, then you're learning the phrases, then larger and larger chunks of a piece you learn. So when you see how effortless the technique is, you get a sense of, oh, okay, that's what they're talking about with motor memory.
You sure that clock wasn't running at half speed? That's all you gotta do.
But you really get a sense of the people that are really virtuosic on instruments. They have this ability to start memorizing in long phrases. So it's almost like a shape and a feel of your body. You're not even thinking of what notes you're playing. You hear the phrase as a larger chunk. Let's see here. Okay, so now we get to integrating pitch and color. And the whole goal of it is to be able to develop a greater level of pitch acuity so that we can hear all these micro pitches and name them in some fashion so that you can recall them later. And basically, there's two types of synesthesia. We have projective synesthesia, which is the one that people are born with. It's very idiosyncratic. So somebody might say, I hear a G and I see blue. And another person will say, oh no, when I hear a G, I see orange. And associative synesthesia is something that we practice. It's part of integrating yet another sense into our practice as musicians. So the steps to developing this type of pitch color synesthesia would be, first of all, just an awareness as you start listening to more microtonal music. You just become aware that there are more pitches than just flat and sharp. So you have that gray area and you start to distinguish different areas in that gray area. Then the next step is to work with intonation. So that's the beauty of the continuum. For me, with all the instruments I've been playing, the continuum is really the gold standard for a polyphonic continuous instrument. And so I'll demonstrate it, but you can, any temperament I pick, I can play the pitches and pitch match with this instrument. Then the third step is the conceptual anchor, and I think that's where microtonal music has kind of hit a roadblock in terms of larger acceptance, because when you're playing in different temperaments, everybody's created different symbols or fractions, and it just, it's so difficult to migrate and move around. So as a result, a lot of people are in different camps. So there'll be people that only play in 31, and other people that only play in 24. And as a chromatic jazz musician, I'm like, I want to play in all of them. So how can we simplify the process? And the whole purpose of the conceptual anchor is you start to distinguish these pitches and you name it something so that you can recall it later. So then you can perform in these different temperaments. And then, of course, memory comes after recall. Now this is awareness, so listen to the micro pitches. So the interesting thing about this sound when you're adding micro pitches is creating all of these little chimey harmonics on the top. And that's the thing that intrigues me, is like, how do you optimize sound design to, I don't even know what those, if they're called artifacts or what it would be called, but it's like, how do you design something that would maximize the effect of micro-pitch interactions without blurring it? Because when I first started with the Continuum, Lippold was saying, get the most clean sound, no modulation, and that was the best advice ever because it really helps you to hear and distinguish those pitches. So when we're talking about conceptual anchors, I talked about that a little bit earlier, and basically all I can think of are three general varieties of creating them for pitch, micro pitches. And number, symbol, and color. And for me, the most intuitive was color. And we were talking about this earlier about notation and why it's still important. And from my perspective, I've heard about it more frequently on YouTube from comments about, well, I'm just saving it as a project file, or, I'm composing it in my DAW and I archive it as, a FLAC file or a WAV file or something like that. Why bother spending the effort creating a notation system or actually writing it down? And so this is usually my answer. As we get older, we see that, if you saved your project file in eMagic and now it's gone, or an operating system no longer supports the file formats, then it's all lost. And also the second thing about archiving your music as WAV files or whatever in the cloud is this horrible thing that happened. I don't know if you remembered that, but a lot of people lost everything. And so, from my perspective, kind of being in that pre-computer generation, it's like just put it on paper or an open source text format. Now, the way that I think about it theoretically in terms of, what is polychromatic music? I think of it as an evolution of the chromatic system. So in theory, my father was a scientist, so he was talking to me about this kind of stuff. So I think about the electromagnetic spectrum. It's all about analogies, bringing in different areas together. So we have infrared to ultraviolet. Infrared seems flat. Ultraviolet seems sharp. So if you put that on a note, say A, then that spectrum kind of makes sense intuitively. And then empirically, the way that we experience the world, we see rainbows and we see that same spectrum of colors. So then applying that to pitch, it seems like an intuitive series. The series is absolute, Roy G. Biv, but the gradations, like how you would assign A yellow, is really relative to whatever temperament you're using. So if you're using 31 or 106, you would just create more pitch colors within that general series. And so here's an example of how easy it is to just superimpose it on a regular score. And the funny thing about it is that I think that it might be easier now, but you had to take the score out of the finale and then put it in a graphics processing program and then add the colors. But I think that they are addressing that now. And so you could see at the bottom, you kind of give a generic understanding of what the pitch series is for that particular piece. And this is like an analogy of tab notation. So when I'm composing, I don't have time to go in the program and start figuring out, how to put in a pitch color. So really, it's just, like right here, say here, this would be a G blue, a D violet, a C yellow. And so it's a very quick and efficient way to start the composition process. And then usually I have to memorize it because I can't sight read this. And then after the performance is filmed, then I'll go back and notate it in polychromatic notation. Now, when you're thinking about tuning systems, there's two general varieties, and one is just intonation, which is based on the overtone series. And for me, polychromatic is an evolution of the chromatic system in the sense that it has equal intervals, because then you're allowed to transpose into any key. When you have unequal intervals, it's based on a fundamental pitch, so it's very difficult to transpose into other keys, and that was pretty much the impetus for creating 12-tone equal temperament in the first place. Now, the way that I think of just intonation is like a serene, placid lake. So when you hear barbershop quartet, and it just nails that chord, and it's just so beautifully in tune. But with polychromatic music, it's just a different aesthetic. You have all of these waves interacting, and it's a different kind of beauty. So we'll get to the instruments. That's my favorite part. The new MPE instruments that have come out have just been so exciting. I just really enjoy learning new instruments. And so I distinguish them in a few ways. The first way is continuous versus key switch. And like I said before, the Continuum is in a class by itself because it is the gold standard for polyphonic continuous pitch. And as a result, as I work with these microtonal keyboards, the pitch matching and my training in pitch matching, I can actually do on this instrument, where I can't do it on a C board or an instrument or anything like that. So there's an example of how I would approach it. First, it's the awareness of the pitches. So they really are good companions to each other for learning. So other continuous controllers would be a ribbon controller. I haven't had much experience with those. They're not polyphonic, are they? Oh.
Hey, when you do further audio examples, could you turn it up just a little bit?
Oh, yeah, I turned it up here, but I didn't know if that was doing anything there.
Yeah, it's not connected yet.
Oh, it's not connected? Okay. And then, of course, the theremin, which is just amazing. If I had another 20 years, I'd love to learn it. But, yeah, and that would be the difference between a tactile controller where you are using what we just call manual dexterity, and something that's more based on proprioception because you're using your extremities to control the pitch. But as I was seeing with your technique, there is some manual dexterity too. This is just so fascinating. So the second way that I'm thinking about these new instruments is the pitch layout, and that's because I'm kind of oriented toward polychromatic music, exploring how many micropitches we can hear and use in our musical language. So the general layout of most of them is one-dimensional, like a piano. So it's in the x-axis, so that would be the C board, and here's an example of the C board uses a silicone surface, and so when I'm thinking about key switches, what I'm meaning is, on the Continuum, you could hit it anywhere and you'll get a different pitch, a slightly different pitch. With the key switch type instruments, you hit it first and then you change the pitch. So as a result, you really couldn't play, I couldn't match the polychromatic music with these. I'd have to kind of go with a chromatic pitch and slide up, which here's an example of. And hear the gradation? When it's fast, it simulates it, but slowly. So the interesting thing about that is that, and I suppose it's like the light illusion, when lights are going at a certain frequency, it almost seems like they're one thing. And so I don't know what the language is in auditory, but it's almost like it's pixelated. So when you start to play a slow glissando on these instruments that are not continuous, you really start to hear, like, I don't know what the word is, but it's segmented. I I don't know what the word is. And then, of course, we were seeing the Osmos, which is just wonderful. And the thing that's, from my perspective, that's really unique about it is that it uses the actual key as the part that moves. With the instrument, it's a keypad, so you're using your finger, just rotating your finger. I don't know if they're called contact switches, but this one is more of a mechanical switch. Can't wait to try that. And then, of course, the Continuum. And what this slide reminds me of is there's becoming more and more options for instruments. And I think for younger people, because it's kind of a high price to enter this world, it's like, how do you pick your instrument? How do you know if you would have preferred to play the violin or the piano or the trumpet? And so with a Continuum fingerboard, it appeals to me as a fretless bass player, as a saxophonist, somebody that plays a melodic lead instrument. And then other instruments like the instrument has a geometry, so you have offset pitches, and there's a geometry of the way you see it and how it's written out on tab that's really appealing if you're in that kind of guitar mode. So it's something to think about if somebody's looking to get into the world of new 21st century MPE controllers. So the second way that we see layouts for these new controllers is where pitch exists in the X and Y axis. And this is helpful as a companion to the Continuum because that's part of your training to expand beyond 12 notes. You have to have some kind of reference pitch. So the way that I think about it is like the old organs. You're just stacking keyboards on top of each other. So the Microsome came out, I think, in the late 90s. And this, as you can see, it has the chromatic overlay, and then it's got 6 rows on it, so I was able to get 72 notes per octave. And it's backward compatible because it has the chromatic overlay. But more recently, the Lumitone isomorphic keyboard came out. And it's called isomorphic because it doesn't have a chromatic overlay. So this kind of gave me the idea of simplifying even further by eliminating all accidentals and just going A through G, and then you have 8 shades of each color. And I was thinking, what are the implications of that? So I've been trying to work with composing with it to see if it just changes your outlook on how you look at intervals when you're not thinking in terms of semitones anymore. And the instrument also, this is something that I've really started appreciating much more once I got out of the keyboard mindset and into a guitar mindset, because it really is so enjoyable if you love the geometry of patterns. And it really gives you a lot of different, I don't really use it microtonally, but just in terms of a different type of practice in geometry. So here's an example of how this one. So anywhere you hit on the key, same note. So then as you compare that to the Continuum, after you're listening to this more and more, I don't know if you can hear it, but it's very chunky. It's pixelated in an auditory sense. And then you can tell your ears are developing. And so I wanted to show you basically what is in the studio here. So the instrument, and then this is the 70 and the 46, is it? Yeah. So the 70 has the old texturized surface, which I tend to enjoy more because I like to use the haptic element of the keyboard when I can't feel the difference.
Can I interrupt for a second? How are we for time?
We have 26 minutes.
Can I take 1 minute?
Sure, please.
Okay, so I have to make a $40,000 decision, which for me is a lot of money. We have to buy neoprene soon again. And I have 2 choices. One is to do the same as we did, and for the next 10 years, then I will have, same as we have. We went to this untextured neoprene because people didn't like this idea of when they're playing that you have this old half-step system imposed on you. Because if you just see it, that's fine, but when you're feeling it, when you're playing, that was irritating for people. Since then, though, I talked to Ed, and he says, oh, either way is fine with him. So I made it through step one. Rob and now Dolores are of this camp. They were playing when there was silk screen. I have to make a decision. I can't do both. Is there a show of hands of people that would prefer the silk screen, that are familiar with it?
The silk screen is the recent one or the old one?
The bumpy one. We got 3 there. You guys all had Continuum since forever. What about this idea of keeping as it is and now, where we're really it's egalitarian in that way. It's not okay. We have at least one vote for that. And so, you better talk to Ed. No. And you also like it. Well, you're a theremin player, see, but that's the thing, he's a theremin player. And I don't understand that theremin. Air is why do you want your air to change?
It's like air braille.
I wonder if it's the application though, because if you're playing melodically, like one note at a time, then the seamlessness is wonderful to not run into the texture. But if you're trying to play harmonically, 4, 5, 6 notes at the same time, it really saves so much time to feel where you are on that boundary. It just gives you a reference point without having to look at each finger. So I think it might be application.
Yeah, I really can't. I mean, it's a huge investment.
Yeah.
Because the neoprene is manufactured.
Well, for me also, since I try to play on this part of my finger that's soft rather than on the tips, I can really feel it, I mean, so if you're playing like that, it's going to be less, maybe less of an impression of orientation. If you're playing this way, I think you feel.
You're saying it's just less effective to have the silk screen if you play with your fingertips.
Probably.
Especially
if you're a guitar player and you have calluses.
Is there a way to add it after? Like, a user could add it? Is it difficult to put texturizing on yourself?
Oh, yeah, very difficult. Spent many years at it. So the place that makes the silk screen, they make building wraps, which is, I'm sorry, this is maybe their saving grace. I don't know if you're familiar building wraps are. So in LA, if you want to put an advertisement up, it's really cool to wrap a skyscraper in your advertisement. And that's what they do. So they have a huge thing. They make these things. They have an oven that is maybe 1/8 of a mile long and has very particular heating temperature.
Wow.
So the sheets of neoprene, this is tiny for them, sheets of neoprene move through the oven. It's an 8-hour process to do the silk screening, but it's really good.
Yeah.
Yes?
Is there a difference in the durability between the 2 processes?
No, they're both great. This guy is still playing his 2003 or whenever you started. Yeah. So no, I mean, if you press really hard on your surface, maybe you could wear out the neoprene. But unless you play fast and loud a lot.
Is that you can do both?
No, well, it's very expensive.
No.
And it's also sort of...
The bottom half can be have the thing, and the top.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
Okay, so the thing about this surface that's weird is, one advantage of the silk screen is then every Continuum would have the same number of half steps. Especially if you more recently bought one, it actually varies because it turns out stretching the neoprene to some length is a bad idea. So the way this is made is they make a special nylon, they print the nylon, then when neoprene is made, it's in pans that are maybe the size, 2 meters, 1 meter by 2 meter pans, like cake pans. The neoprene rises, and there's a bunch of workers there that try to put down at the right time, just before it collapses, put down the material. So they can't be exactly the same. I was kind of giggling when people were worried about key widths on the osmos. But anyway, yeah.
So I always feel like my connection to it is better on that surface.
But you also started on that surface. I think it's
That's
100% what you started on.
I started on it too, but I'm fine with the new one.
I'm all right with the new one.
So you're not like Gregoire. You're not anti-change,
Progress.
anti-progress. She's not anti-progress.
Before dinner, might we reserve some time after this discussion?
Yes, I don't want to go on, I
Yeah.
didn't need to be, I just wanted to show hands, but it is a serious decision. Anyway, by the end of this ContinuuCon, I'd like to have made it, yeah.
Yeah, I guess from my perspective, if you're going beyond 12 notes per octave, like you're trying to get to 24 and 36, the level, it's like the sensitivity of Braille, that pretty soon you really sense where you are on these different keys, because at least you have some tactile reference. But if it's, I guess you would call it an isomorphic surface or something without any gradation, you really have to rely on your eyes and ears, which is very taxing, just from practice between the two.
And
Yeah,
coming
get
from
it.
you, I'm actually surprised which camp you're in. So
Well, I have one of each, so it's kind of nice to compare them. But when I have to do polychromatic practice, I always end up with a textured surface. It's much easier. So in the studio here, let's see here, the two Continua, and then the Lumitone, which came out, I guess, a year or two ago. It's really wonderful just because of the color implementation. And then over here, well, you can't really see it, but this is the Touche, because these key switches were very, very simple and rudimentary. And so to add some MPE, oh, that's the other thing I was going to mention is you'll notice there's two computers here, because, you know, I'm like, oh, I want to connect all of these in my studio, and it totally crashed the computer. I don't know where the MIDI buffer is, and maybe it's in Nuendo. I have the latest version of Nuendo. I thought, oh, okay, that's the best, so I'll try that. And so what I've had to do is split all the MIDI keyboards in half and send half to the Mac and half to the PC. And I still can only get up to about 10 notes of polyphony before notes start to hang and just bizarre MIDI problems start to happen. And I was thinking, you know, maybe that's the way it is when you're using new instruments. You just have to hack around. You don't really understand the theory behind the instruments, but you just want to find a stable setup that'll work for everything. I'm still working on that. And right here, this is called the E-Ray Touch. And I was intrigued by it. I haven't had a chance to really delve into it, but apparently it's got a very high density of sensors, so it's supposed to be very sensitive to touch, but it's also very durable. So they said that you can play it as a percussion controller with your hands or with sticks, and it's not going to wear out the sensors. So that's kind of next on my list to try to figure out these things. So does anybody has any questions about polychromatic or how you would approach? Yes?
What was that last sentence? You said it was an E-Ray?
E-Ray Touch.
E-Ray.
Yeah, I think it was a Kickstarter, and now they're starting to be in full production. But it's interesting because the software is developing for it, and initially my impression was, oh, this is like a big rolly blocks, because, you know, you can adjust different parameters, and there's, you know, virtual faders and that kind of thing. But I was thinking of it more like, oh, is this a Continuum I could take to the beach or something? You know, just a very durable, solid surface that you could take anywhere on the plane. And I'm still trying to figure that out, so, yeah.
Yeah, about the Lumitone.
Yes.
What is the signification of the color? You select the color of your shot?
Oh, yeah, so they offer software which allows you to assign a MIDI note number to every pitch, so it's much easier to do more than 12 notes per octave, and then the color as well. And it's also, their Kickstarter was probably about 6 or 7 years ago, and so everybody's waiting years and years, and it turns out it was the lever technology that was really holding them up. Because you could see the maybe you could see, the microzone's just a flat series of hex keys, but the Continuum is cascaded, so coming from you, every key slightly higher. And you know, it's like each one has strengths and limitations, so with that design, doing a glissando in this direction is very, very easy. You can't do it in the other way. And I was just so intrigued, like ergonomically, is that going to be less fatiguing to the hand? And it turns out it's just different. Your technique changes to the instrument, to the tool that you have. And that's what's so wonderful. I look at these with more heart than the word implies, but they're all tools, and your body adapts to them. And then you say, well, what like this, the Continuum harkens to me. It makes me say, okay, how far can we develop pitch resolution? Because I can pre-program all these pitches on there and start to compose with them, but until I can actually pitch match on an instrument where it's not set, then that's when I know I'm really, and that's the next step for me, is to try to incorporate the Continuum with these microtonal instruments.
Did you get the Continuum, when you got the Continuum, did you do 12 notes per octave practice for the first, or did you dive straight in with polychromatic music?
Well, I was already into the polychromatic music since the late 90s. And so as soon as I got the instrument, I was like, oh, well, how can I put it into this application? Because it's a continuous controller. It can do anything. And then it was one of those things where you start out with just intonation, like that placid lake, getting everything in tune. And it's beautiful, but when you start to listen to the harmonies of polychromatic music, all those phase interactions and beat frequencies, it's just a different kind of beauty. And so I was like, well, this instrument can do both of them. And so that's kind of what I'm exploring now.
So when you're matching pitches, I mean, are you talking about, like, say, let's just speak basically non-chromatic, like if you're holding something that would be equivalent of however altered a fifth is on the set thing.
Yeah.
And then say you're trying to find what the altered third would be on the continuum, or are you matching identical pitches?
Well, first you start with identical pitches, and then I'm back to Jerry Coker's Patterns for Jazz. So I'll make up a riff or something, a simple one, like say 5 notes, and then you start playing that in all 72 keys. And it's just really an ear training, not a technique exercise. And then as you start to hear, like when I was listening to more spectral music after that with overtones, all of a sudden you're really perceiving the richness of all the harmonics because you've learned to discriminate all those different pitches. Yes?
Do you tend to find that you're limiting your spectrum smaller? Like, are you playing within one octave as you're concentrating on all these notes? And the second part of this question, if you're adding a low bass note,
Yeah.
how do the overtone series react with all the microtonality? Do you have to adjust to that?
Well, I'm just using simple patches like the golden advice I got at the beginning. And so, yeah, I found that when I try to delve into something more complex sound, it just blurs all of the interactions of micro pitches. So, and I wonder if it's like the face-vase illusion that you can have one or the other. I'd like to see if one day maybe there is a way that they can coexist and accentuate all of these upper harmonics that are already happening. And in terms of like practicing the pitch matching, it's easiest to start in lower octaves, but you know, when it's 72 notes per octave, after 1 octave, it's like, I'm moving on. You know, it's just like, oh my God, because it's a very slow process. And also, it gets you to start, not with this instrument, it's made me start singing as well. So before I play the note, I'm singing the note. Just to really anchor the idea of these different gradations of pitch so that they're not in the gray area of flat and sharp anymore. You start to say, oh, it's kind of a series. It's a little more red, it's a little more violet, you know, that kind of thing. So, yeah.
So you were talking about the cool chimey resultant tones that you get in these different systems. I'm wondering if you have ever tried to write a piece where those things, when you're able to control those to make a melody up in the stratospheric high voice out of the harmonies that you're creating.
You know, that would be such a great idea. Right now I feel like I'm still in kindergarten with this stuff because it really is truly, it feels like an exploration of things that are just still pretty uncharted. And so to color code it seems like overly simple, but it's efficient. And yeah, when I hear those things, it's like you get that question, what does that mean? What are the implications? How could we design sounds that would accentuate it or complement it? But I'm still working on technique and trying to see what the limits are. Because with the Lumitone, that one's in 56 notes per octave. And then the Microzone is in 72. Before that, I played a tonal plexus, which had 106 notes per octave. And ironically, it was designed like Braille, so you had different shaped keys and different height keys. So after playing it for a while, it became incredibly ergonomic and efficient. But making keyboards with over 1,000 buttons was just unsustainable for Aaron Hunt. He couldn't do it anymore. So, and plus the way that, I don't know if you've ever seen it, it just looks intimidating. So, and that's another thing about the Continuum, very inviting when you see it. You know, it just, like Sally was talking about mounting lights and stuff on it. I guess that's what when you see the Lumitone, it's like, how do you, you know, bring some color into this interface? But that's probably surface technologies or something, I don't know, new polymers in the future. But yes, so much to learn. Yeah. Radical?
You have the colors laid in the vertical order, and the pitch goes up that way, but you also have a deviation on the y-axis.
Yes.
Would that mean any, or could that be useful for you to have on the continuum? Something like the middle range of y being about just in the just tune, and then go up and
I don't even know how you would do that. I mean, unless you quantized regions to go up. But the thing is then this is trying to do something that is not.
It will not be accurate because
Yeah.
it goes to the y-axis and it could be quantized.
Yeah. It's just that those
I was
key.
wondering if that could be some interesting experimentation, or
Well, you know,
sticking on that.
I guess it's like these, the key switch instruments are so optimized for that, the two-dimensional pitch thing. And this one is so optimized for something exactly the opposite. So anything that would compromise that continuous nature of the pitch, you know, that's why I would combine it with. I don't know, I mean, I guess you could. In fact, we had emailed about it several years ago, and you were saying it's only 7-bit resolution in this dimension?
Well, and the absolute resolution is very poor. You can maybe do 3 zones.
Oh,
So as a relative thing, it's very useful, you know, for expression and stuff. I'm not putting it down,
Yeah.
but it's absolute resolution. So it you know, it would 3 zones is about the limit, and that's so low that.
Yeah. So yeah, but we were talking about.
I've always, you know, whenever people say, oh, they really like to use it like a microtonal keyboard, I was cautioned, no, it's not.
It's
a microtonal.
complementary. Yeah, it
Yeah,
can play any microtone.
Yeah. And, yeah, it's more like playing violin than it is like playing a keyboard.
Yes. Yeah.
I would just make a comment, and it's sort of an adjunct to what Julia had mentioned in terms of having a pedal tone which had a certain harmonic series that's starting to apply itself into whatever scalar thing. I think in sort of in a general sense that if you start to compose with a particular timbre and you start to become really aware of these overtones and the way they're influencing the particular microtonal notes that you're playing, you would just use that in the composition process and everything would start to resolve itself within notes of tension and notes of resolution with those overtones.
Yeah, I guess I don't think about it like that analytically or whatever. It's just the ear, just so intuitive of like, yeah, when you hit certain harmonies and then all of a sudden you feel like a resonance in your body. You're like, well, which one is it? I don't know, just write it down and do it again kind of thing. And so, yeah.
And it depends on timbre, that's what I think. That's a component of it.
Yeah, yeah. Wonderful. Isn't it ironic that well, not ironic, it's a beautiful happenstance that we are in this era of such rapid technological change and all these new tools coming all the time, very ephemeral technology. And then here we have this castle that's over a millennia old, and it just kind of balances like the enduring and the ephemeral all in one conference. It's beautiful.
Well, I could balance the serious nature with something stupid. if you want to write a book and make colorized microtonality popular, you should call it 50 Shades of A.
The Joker. That's great.